The story draws from Lovecraft-style dread, an ancient entity beyond human understanding, the town's complicity through silence, the cyclical nature of the horror. The worst part isn't death, but eternal conscious suffering. The mouth of the deep. The fishermen of Greycove had a saying, "Never look at the fog too long, or the fog will look back." Marcus thought it was superstition. He'd moved to the coastal town 6 months ago for the solitude, renting a weathered cottage that smelled of salt and old wood. The locals kept their distance, polite but cold, like the ocean that crashed against the rocks below his window every night. He should have paid attention to their warnings. It started 3 days ago. Marcus had been walking the beach at dawn, looking for driftwood to burn in his fireplace, when he noticed something odd about the morning mist. It hung too still over the water, thick and gray-green, refusing to dissipate even as the sun rose higher. And within it, he could swear he saw a shape, massive, distant, watching. He blinked, and it was gone. That night he dreamed of drowning, not the thrashing, panicked kind, but a slow, inevitable descent into darkness, his lungs filling with water that tasted ancient and wrong. He woke gasping, his sheets soaked with seawater, though his windows were closed. The next morning, he found the first tooth. It was the size of his forearm, curved like a saber, lying in the sand just beyond his doorstep. The enamel was gray-white and inscribed with patterns that hurt to look at, symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't watching directly. Marcus picked it up, felt its unnatural weight, and dropped it immediately when the surface grew warm beneath his fingers. He should have left Greycove then. But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, kept him rooted. He asked around town about the tooth. The fisherman turned away. The shopkeeper claimed ignorance. Only an old woman named Petra would speak to him, and her words were a hiss. "Throw it back into the sea, tonight, before the third tide." "What happens at the third tide?" asked Marcus. Petra's eyes were wet with fear. "It finishes what it started. It always does." Marcus went home with the tooth wrapped in canvas, telling himself he'd throw it back. But when he arrived at his cottage, he found his door ajar. Inside, seaweed was strewn across the floor in deliberate patterns, circles within circles, all leading to his bedroom. And there, on his pillow, was another tooth. He ran. The beach was his only option. The road out of town had collapsed in a storm weeks ago and hadn't been repaired. Marcus sprinted across the sand as evening fell, the fog rolling in fast and unnatural. It moved against the wind, pursuing him like something alive. That's when he saw it. The shape in the fog was no longer distant. It towered above the waterline, impossibly vast, its form both solid and ethereal, as if reality itself struggled to contain it. The creature had no true body, only a suggestion of flesh, pale, wrinkled, ancient beyond comprehension. But the mouth, God, the mouth was real. It hung open like a chasm, wider than his cottage, deeper than the ocean trench. Rows of teeth, dozens of them, hundreds, lined that throat, each one identical to the teeth he'd found. The inside pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat, and within that darkness, Marcus saw shapes, human shapes, fishermen, townspeople, all of them standing perfectly still, staring out at him with empty eyes. They were still alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive inside that thing. "You took what was mine," a voice said, not spoken but felt, vibrating through his bones like sonar. "The tide brings all debts to shore." Marcus stumbled backwards, his feet sinking into wet sand. "I didn't know. I'll give it back." Too late. The mouth gaped wider, its jaw unhinging with a sound like grinding stones. The third tide has come. He looked down. The ocean was rising, waves surging forward with impossible speed, but the water wasn't blue. It was the same gray-green as the fog, thick and viscous. It wrapped around his ankles like hands, pulling him toward the mouth. Marcus clawed at the sand, screaming, but there was no one to hear. The townspeople knew better to venture out during the third tide. He'd been warned. He'd been given a chance. The water reached his waist, his chest, his throat. He took one last breath before it pulled him under, dragging him through the surf toward that waiting maw. His vision blurred, but he could see others in the water with him, translucent figures, ghosts or echoes, all being drawn toward the same destination. The mouth swallowed him whole. Inside was worse than darkness. Inside was awareness. Marcus could feel the presence of every other person who'd been consumed, their minds pressed against his like bodies in a too-small room. They'd been here for years, decades, some for centuries, all conscious, all waiting. Why? He managed to think through the suffocating pressure. The creature's answer rippled through them all. Because you are remembered, because I am the mouth of the deep, and the deep is always hungry. Because your kind built your towns on my teeth and thought there would be no reckoning. Marcus tried to scream, but he had no mouth anymore. He was dissolving, becoming part of the creature's living gallery of prey, preserved, aware, eternal. On the beach above, the fog began to recede. The waves calmed. By morning, Greycove would return to its quiet routine, and the fishermen would cast their nets with down-turned eyes. And in 6 months or a year, another newcomer would arrive, curious about the gray-green fog and the strange teeth that sometimes washed ashore. The cycle would continue, because the tide always brings debts to shore, and the deep is always, always hungry. In his cottage, Marcus's phone buzzed with an unread message from his sister. "Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay?" It would ring unanswered for weeks, until eventually she too would come to Greycove looking for answers. The fog would be waiting.